Most people think if they earn $100,000 a year that they can suddenly afford $1 million house. And that's just not the case. So today I'm breaking down exactly how to calculate how much you can afford to make sure that you don't go house poor. But first, my name is Tiffany. I'm a loan officer here in Las Vegas, Nevada. I helped over 200 families with their real estate needs and would love to help you with yours. I can help with things such as buying a home, refinancing a home, maybe even taking out some equity in your home. So if you have any of those needs, I'm going to leave my contact information in the description below. I would love to hear from you and chat and see how we can work together. As well, this is a growing channel and I greatly appreciate everyone who has been subscribing, commenting, liking, etc. So I would greatly appreciate if you did so on this video so I know to keep making content for you guys. But now let's get on to the video. So before we get into actually how to calculate how much you can afford, let's break down some common myths that people have when it comes to affordability. So myth number one, you need a 20% down payment in order to buy a home. This is actually not the case. In fact, very rarely do I recommend someone go this route unless they're truly just concerned about their monthly payment and not paying anything outside of just what is needed to buy the home. Because very rarely do you actually see people putting 20% down. A lot of times you'll see somewhere in the neighborhood between 3.5% to like 10%. Like even some of my investor clients are not paying 20% for a down payment. So it's not something that I would really recommend, especially in this economy when we really know what's going on. I recommend everyone keeping their cash on hand and not putting all of it into the home. So I would just say that 20% does have some great benefits. It's very rare that I would actually recommend someone putting 20% down unless that's truly just something that they want to accomplish. They don't want to pay mortgage insurance. They don't want to have an extra expense when it comes to buying their home. At that point, it might make more sense to put down 20%, but very rarely am I seeing it. Like if I'm talking to 10 clients, maybe one of them is putting 20% down. Again, even my investor clients aren't putting 20% down. So I personally just don't recommend that method. I know a lot of financial gurus are going to say that that is the best way to go because you don't have to pay mortgage insurance. But mortgage insurance is very temporary if you're going conventional. So I would just recommend you can sometimes refinance out of that once your house is appreciated enough, equity, etc. But for the most part, do not worry about having 20% down. It is kind of a waste of time, especially if you're just trying to get into a home. But if that's something that you absolutely want to accomplish before you buy a home, again, not a deal breaker. It's just very rare that I actually see it. Number two, the bank determines how much you can afford. Now, this is a very slippery slope because as a lender, I'm always going to look at what options do we have. So I'm going to pre-qualify you based on pretty much the highest amount that I think that we can get qualified for. And a lot of times what happens is I see, like, let's just say someone comes to me and they're like, I want a $300,000 home, but I can pre-qualify them for $500,000. I will give them that option. I will give them what the payment looks like at that $500,000 mark, as well tell them, hey, based on experience, this is the kind of home that we can get. Does this work for you? Does this not work for you? And then they're able to make a well-educated decision about, hey, maybe that $300,000 mark isn't enough for us. Maybe we need a $400,000 home, etc. As a lender, I'm always going to look at what options we have and give you the information needed so you can make that decision. However, I am not the one telling you you can afford a $500,000 house because I don't know your situation as far as, if you have other commitments. Like if it's not on your credit report, I'm not going to see it. So anything like groceries, utilities, all of these things, like I'm not going to see that. If there is a big expense that I'm not aware of, then I would not be able to properly account for that. I would highly recommend working with a loan officer who's going to give you the options and tell you, hey, based on what you want, this is the price point you can get. If we go to this much, that's how much we can get, etc. But your bank is not supposed to tell you exactly how much you can afford. They can just tell you what you're qualified for, and you can decide based on what that payment looks like, can you afford it? Last but not least, if you can afford the mortgage, you can afford the home. This kind of ties into the last point I made. So let's just say in that example, you go for that $500,000 home. And technically on paper, you can afford a $4,000 mortgage. But as you go through your day-to-day, you realize, hey, $4,000 mortgage after my taxes and everything are taken out of my paycheck is bleeding into a lot of it. At that point, you have to decide, is this actually how much I can afford? Or should I maybe take a lower priced home that I feel way more comfortable in? Again, that kind of ties into having a loan officer breakdown. Like if I decide to go for this price point, how much is that payment going to look like? And if that payment is my monthly payment every month, should I decide to move forward with that payment, or should I maybe look at a lower payment to make things more affordable for me, since homeownership is a completely different ballgame than say renting is, etc. So let's get into the 28-36 rule. So this is a very widely accepted general rule of thumb, etc. way of looking at how much can you actually afford when it comes to buying a home. There's different ratios you can use. Like I know like to qualify, a lot of times the guidelines are like 31%, 40 something. But basically what this all breaks down to is how much of your monthly income is going towards housing, and then combined with housing, how much of your income is going out. So in the 28-36 rule, 28% of your income should be used for housing. So this includes anything like your mortgage payment, HOA fees, property taxes, all of those things. And then combined with that housing payment, 36% of your income should be used towards living, basically. So this is utilities, bills, payments, etc. So that ideally, only 36% of your income is forced as bills. You can use the other part of your income for savings, for spending, for fun, etc. That is a general rule of thumb, and that's a number that I tend to find a lot of people are comfortable with. However, a lot of times at that range, a lot of people don't qualify for the house that they want. So I've gone up to about 33% and then 43% all in. Roughly about 50% of your income is what I would say if you're being very bullish. If you're just like, yeah, I'm gonna go all in. But if you're being conservative, you want to make sure you have money for savings and all of those things, I would recommend 28-36. Let's break this down using a real life example. So let's just use that $100,000 number. So each month you get about $8,000. So in this example, about 2,300-ish should be going towards your mortgage, housing, etc. And then all in, about $3,000 should be going towards living expenses, towards groceries, towards bills, etc. So all in, about $3,000 a month should be going towards other things. Now, in that $8,000 a month example, likely there's going to be money taken out for taxes, there's going to be money that you need to allocate for savings, etc. In that example, that is a very comfortable way of living, that 28% number, and then 36% of your total income going towards all your bills. That is a very healthy, stable number. Now, with that being said, there are some costs of homeownership that people don't realize. They just assume that the mortgage payment is everything. That's it. And they don't really account for the other things that you need to account for when you're a homeowner. So let's talk about some other expenses that go into your mortgage payment. So one, the mortgage is not the only cost. So a lot of times people, they think, okay, so if I buy a $500,000 home, then the mortgage payment is going to be X. They don't really account for anything other than the mortgage payment when it comes to buying that house and if they can actually afford that house. So some things that come up that people may not be aware of is things like property taxes. So if you own a home, you are responsible for the property taxes for that home. And that is how your county government basically collects income to further their own projects. And everyone that owns a home has to pay into those. And usually your property taxes are figured out each year by the county based on your home's value. That is something every month or every year you're going to have to pay in order to even just own the home. That doesn't go towards you. That doesn't go towards the home itself. That is just a cost of doing business, basically. Secondly, you have to account for is homeowners insurance. So every lender is pretty much going to require you to have homeowners insurance in order to get a loan on the property. And homeowners insurance just basically ensures that if anything were to happen to the home, that investment on our end is good. It also helps too, like once you pay off the home, that if anything should happen to the home, your investment's good. Basically, whoever owns the most of the home is the one who sees the benefit of homeowners insurance. But it's a requirement in order to have a mortgage to have homeowners insurance. So that is an extra expense that you're going to have to account for. Now, usually homeowners expenses are calculated based on the home itself. How much does it need to be covered? And it's usually a certain percentage based on your area, like where you live. How much percentage of the value do you need to insure to make sure if anything should happen to it, we get it covered. Homeowners insurance is a must, and again, you technically will see the benefit of it if anything should ever happen to your home. However, if you don't see anything ever happen to your home, you may not ever see the true benefit of having homeowners insurance. Third, HOA fees. Now, this is very common in some areas, especially like here in Vegas. Like almost every desirable community to live in has an HOA. And this is basically a fee that, again, has nothing to do with the house itself other than the fact that it's in a certain community and you have access to certain things in that community. A lot of times what you'll see is a fee if you have like landscaping in the area. Maybe you have an HOA if there's a pool that the community shares, or like if there's a park. A lot of times in Vegas, you'll see HOAs on top of HOAs. So there's a layer of people who can tell you what's okay and not okay to do with your home. Usually you have to pay the fees for every HOA that you're in. Now, each community sets their own fees, so there's no telling based on rough numbers what the community you end up wanting to be a part of charges in HOAs. But a general rule of thumb is that if you're going to like a condo or a townhome, expect to pay pretty high HOA fees because there's usually more shared amenities in those areas. If you're buying just like a regular home, expect to still see somewhat of an HOA fee, especially here in Vegas, although there are some areas that do not have HOAs. What I usually see is in the neighborhood of like $50 to $200 a month, depending on the area you live in and what you get access to for a particular neighborhood. Something else to account for when you decide to make the plunge into homeownership is saving funds for maintenance and repairs, because as a homeowner, the house is now your responsibility. So if anything should go out, like your air conditioning unit goes out, or like your dishwasher goes out, your washer and dryer goes out, etc., it is on you to actually pay for those repairs to be done. A lot of times I recommend people get a home warranty program. That way they can at least have some ease with the burden of cost in those areas. Let's just say you even don't decide to go for a home warranty and you decide to pay out of pocket for everything. I always recommend about 1% of the home's value should be saved in an account. That way, if anything should happen to the home, you have funds to dip into and you don't have to go bankrupt just changing something simple about the home that needs to be repaired. Last but not least, utilities. No one really talks about this, but utilities change drastically if you decide to go from renting to buying. You have more space in the home, so if you're used to paying a certain amount like electricity and energy, all of these things, expect that number to go up if you decide to buy a home. So that is always something I like to warn people about, that your utilities are going to change if you decide to make the change from like an apartment to a home, because your space has grown. I would just say save about 1% of the home's value every year just for repairs and just for maintenance. So now that we've talked a little bit more about affordability and some things to consider, your lifestyle. So depending on what your lifestyle choices are, that might determine if it makes sense for you to buy a home, or maybe that'll impact the actual type of home you end up going for. Just because you can afford it, does that mean you should go ahead and make the plunge and buy? You know, I'm a big proponent of buying over renting. However, depending on your lifestyle, it actually might make more sense for you to rent. Like, let's just say you travel a lot, or you're like a traveling nurse, or you have a job that requires you to be on the road a lot. Well, then at that point, it may not make sense for you to buy if you are someone who doesn't really know where you want to set up camp yet. A lot of your expenses actually go towards you traveling, because now if you buy a home, you have more expenses, your utilities are more expensive, you have to save for things. So you don't want to get yourself into a trap if you are someone who needs to travel a lot or just likes to travel a lot. Some other expenses to consider are like, do you have student loans? Do you have a lot of expenses? Do you have a lot of debt that you want to tackle? Like, that can affect your ability to make strides in those areas, because now a lot of your income is going towards buying a home. Or even if you're someone who, let's just say you want to start a family soon and you buy a home and you want to get out of it like a year later. Like, at that point, it would have made more sense to just wait out the year and bought when you're actually ready versus, you know, buying it and regretting it. And the worst thing that I see that can happen is people going what's called house poor. And this is where most of your income is going towards this house, towards payments, towards etc. And you no longer have funds to invest, you don't have funds to save, you don't have funds to go out and have fun. So you basically put all your eggs in one basket and just put everything into the mortgage itself. And that's no way to live, truthfully. Like, I know a lot of people who do it, and there's nothing against that if that's you. But for me personally, I know that I like to have money. I like to have, you know, a savings account. I like to spend when I can. So for me, I would never want to put myself in a position where most of my income had to go towards a mortgage or like towards savings, towards maintenance, all of these things, because I know myself well enough to know that with the standard of living that I have and the lifestyle choices that I have, like I like to travel, I like to spend, all of these things, that I don't want that to get in the way because I decided to take on a bigger payment than I really needed. So let's calculate your ideal budget when it comes to a mortgage payment. And I'm actually going to reverse engineer this. Based on what you're currently paying today, how much payment can you actually afford? Look at all the things you're paying for. So this includes things like car payments, credit card. This can also include things like student loans, which I know people aren't paying right now, but likely people are going to need to pay in the nearby future. So just go ahead and account for those student loan payments. Account for your cell phone payment, account for any utilities you currently pay. Come up with that number and then try living on that payment for like 6 months. So let's just say on that $100,000 budget, and we're using the 28-36 rule, $2,300 is what we can put towards your mortgage, and then about $3,000 is what we can put towards your everyday living expenses. Try to live like that for 3 to 6 months and see, is this sustainable? Is this not sustainable? Do I feel like I am putting way too much money into what I'm got going on, or should I maybe go for a lesser price home? You would be surprised with the results if you actually just try to live out what your budget would look like. Using the 28-36 rule, using what you're comfortable with payments wise, try to reverse engineer what that mortgage payment should look like for you in order for you to not feel house poor. Honestly, drop that in the comments below. If you're watching this video and you're doing that calculation, I would love to know, what is your ideal mortgage payment, and do you think you could actually find a home for that payment? I would love to see what you guys come up with. Now, when we talk about affordability, it's very important to note that a lot of websites will often overstate how much you can actually afford. And a lot of times sites like NerdWallet or Zillow, they make money on the referral. So if you decide to use their loan officer, if you decide to use the bank that they're promoting, then they get a kickback of those funds. So they're always going to encourage you to go for as much as you can, oftentimes overestimate how much that payment would actually be. I would take those like online calculators with a grain of salt, because again, they don't really have your best intentions in mind, and they're oftentimes just trying to sell you as a lead to another company so that they can get money from that sale. Take those with a grain of salt. It's always best to, first of all, try to figure it out yourself, because I think there's power in knowing your own financial situation. But if that is absolutely not an option, or if you're not mathematically inclined, talk to a loan officer. They will definitely give you the better idea of what you could actually afford. So now that we figured out what your ideal mortgage payment is and how we can get to that number, let's just say you actually can't qualify for the home that you actually want. Let's use that 100K budget that we've been using thus far. At 2,300, the house that you're looking at is probably in the neighborhood of about 300,000 to 350,000 based on today's rates, and that's based in the Las Vegas market, based on Las Vegas property taxes and insurance rates as I currently know them. If that is not a price point that you're comfortable with, what are some options that you have? Well, one, you can actually utilize programs like FHA to buy multi-unit properties and actually use the rental income from the other properties to help you qualify for the mortgage. So this is a method that a lot of people are utilizing, whether it's on multi-unit properties, or even if, let's just say, they buy a normal single-family home and let's just say it's on the higher end of their budget, they'll actually decide to rent out rooms in their house to help offset that mortgage payment and make it a little bit more affordable. You could also consider maybe a longer commute. So maybe instead of living in the city, you decide to live in the suburbs a little bit, and even altogether maybe living in a different city. I know there's a lot of remote work that still exists. So if you don't have to be in an area that is very populated, that the pricing of homes is more expensive, then maybe consider living in a different city that allows you to buy within your means. Something I always recommend too is that if you improve your credit score, you can oftentimes get a better interest rate. And especially in today's market where interest rates are still hovering in like high 6-7% range depending on your credit score. The difference between an A+ credit score, a person who barely qualifies, is like 0.25% of the actual interest rate that you qualify for. If that is something that you have control of right now, I would recommend improving your credit score by whatever means possible, because that will make a difference in your affordability. Because if you're someone who just barely qualifies, you're probably going to get a higher interest rate, higher payment, and need to pay more for the house than you probably should have if your credit score was at a lower rate. Last but not least, this is a very controversial topic, but I have to give you all the options if I'm gonna give you the best financial advice possible. Sometimes it makes sense to rent. Obviously, my goal is to help you buy. I think real estate is the pathway to long-term wealth and to prosperity, but in certain seasons, it makes sense to rent. And especially if you're someone who is, let's just say brand new to the workforce and you don't have a ton of money saved and you want to buy, but it's not really in your grasp right now. Like, I don't think there's any shame in renting. I think that renting makes sense for a season, and I think that there's people who are lifelong renters and they love it. They don't have to deal about maintenance. They would rather stay in an apartment and have their utilities cheaper. They don't want to pay HOA fees, etc. So for certain people, renting does make sense, especially if you're someone who doesn't care about building long-term wealth. Renting might make more sense for you, but it's definitely not something I would recommend for everyone, because I do think a lot of people find opportunities and wealth through owning real estate. But if that is not the season for you right now, I don't think there's any shame in that. I would say if you're going to rent for the season because you find that you can't buy, unfortunately, make sure you live in an area where you're able to save for a down payment, because obviously the more you bring as a down payment, I mean, the less that the payment is going to be on the home that you decide to buy. Or if you decide, hey, I'm gonna rent and I want to invest the difference because that will help me accumulate the down payment faster, I also think that that's a great plan too. I would just say renting is not a bad thing. I think that there's a season for everything, and I don't think renting's a bad idea. Like, if you're listening to all of this and you're like, wow, I don't make $100,000 and I can't even afford a $300,000 home, like, might make sense for you to rent for the moment, truthfully. At the end of the day, affordability isn't just a number that I can give you off the whim, or just anyone can tell you like, oh yeah, based on this, you should make this. You should be able to afford this. Like, affordability is such a deep conversation, and I think that it's truly personal. So if you are someone who can figure these numbers out, I would just sit down with your finances one day and just look at how much, is going towards this or going towards that, etc. Like I said earlier in the video, reverse engineer how much you think you can afford for a mortgage payment and see, like, based on that mortgage payment, how much house can I afford? And is that a house that you would be interested in? But if you would like to work together with me, I still have my info in the description box below. So I am happy to run those numbers for you. I'm very mathematically inclined and can help you figure out, based on where your needs are for a mortgage and based on what your current financial position is, I can give you a game plan to be able to afford the house that you want. So if that is something you're interested in, again, everything is going to be in the description below. That is it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please make sure to give a big thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you on the next one. Bye!